Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today, because we're looking at a text that is going to fundamentally challenge a whole lot of assumptions. You know, we often hear that the Great Schism between the Eastern and Western Christian churches was mostly just a political accident, right? A clash of empires, a mix-up of cultures. But what if it goes much, much deeper than that? Today, we're unpacking Vladimir Lossky's masterwork, The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church. Originally published back in 1944, this book is widely considered the absolute most important modern synthesis of Orthodox theology in the West. We're going to explore how Lossky argues that Eastern theology is irreducibly mystical, and why these ancient, super-dense theological debates actually dictate how we understand the ultimate purpose of human life itself.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for this deeply intellectual and spiritual journey. First, the context of a masterwork. 2. Theology as mysticism. 3. Trinitarian tensions and differences. 4. The essence-energies distinction. 5. The ultimate goal, which is theosis. And 6. Evaluation and lasting legacy.
Section 1. Context of a masterwork, a light in the darkness. To really understand this incredibly dense theological text, we have to understand the deeply human reality and the fire it was forged in.
So Vladimir Lossky was a Russian émigré. Born in 1904, he spent almost his entire adult life in exile after the 1917 Russian Revolution. And this timeline here is absolutely crucial. Think about this. When Lossky published this book in 1944, he was a lay Orthodox theologian writing right in the middle of German-occupied Paris. And meanwhile, back in his homeland, his church was producing literally thousands of martyrs under Soviet persecution. He wasn't writing some dry, detached academic textbook from a cozy ivory tower. No way. This was an urgent, deeply committed defense of his faith, written in direct, conscious opposition to Western critics who sometimes viewed Orthodox theology as static or outdated. For Lossky, the stakes honestly couldn't have been higher.
Section 2. Theology as mysticism, the core thesis. And this brings us to Lossky's fundamental paradigm shift regarding the very nature of dogma and theology.
Theology and mysticism are inseparable. For Lossky, you literally cannot have one without the other. In the West, we kind of get used to seeing this strict dichotomy, right? Like there's static institutional religion on one hand and dynamic individual mysticism on the other. Well, Lossky argues that the Eastern tradition completely rejects that split. For the Orthodox Church, dogma isn't some external set of arbitrary rules imposed on believers. Not at all. Dogma is the objective expression of what the Church actually genuinely experiences. And mysticism? That's just the personal appropriation of what the Church teaches. They completely mutually condition each other.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Lossky builds this mystical foundation using something called apophatic theology. Now, apophaticism isn't just saying, oh, well, God is mysterious. It's way more rigorous than that. It is an active attitude of the mind that utterly refuses to form concepts about God. Why? Because the God of Revelation is radically incomprehensible. It's a method of stripping away all our neat little intellectual boxes, transforming rational speculation into a pure, open contemplation of mystery. It literally forces the theologian to hold on to paradoxes without trying to just rationalize them away.
Section 3. Trinitarian tensions and differences, the schism's root. This apophatic foundation leads us directly into the theological heart of the book, which happens to be exactly where the East and the West truly diverge.
Lossky zeroes right in on the filioque controversy. The filioque is the Western Church's addition of the phrase "and the Son" to the Nicene Creed, stating that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Now, Lossky argues this is not just a minor semantic disagreement. From the Eastern perspective, he claims this Western addition subtly shifts the entire focus of Trinitarian theology. Instead of focusing on the distinct, unique divine persons, the spotlight shifts over to the common divine nature.
And this brilliantly illustrates how high-level Trinitarian math impacts everyday human reality. Lossky traces this divergence straight down into anthropology, literally how we view human nature. Because the East emphasizes the distinct divine persons, Eastern theology locates the image of God within the specific human person, the hypostasis. By contrast, Lossky points out that the West, prioritizing the shared divine nature, tends to locate the image of God in shared human faculties, like our intellect or our will.
But let's pause for a second here. If, as the East insists, God's essence is radically incomprehensible, and we have to refuse all concepts about him, how can a human being actually experience him at all? Aren't we just completely cut off?
Section 4. The essence-energies distinction.
experiencing the unknowable. To answer that massive question, we have to look at the dogmatic basis for mystical experience in the East, which is vital to Lossky's entire framework.
Okay, so the crucial puzzle piece here is the Palamite distinction, named after the 14th century St. Gregory Palamas. Lossky explains that the East differentiates between God's essence and God's energies. The divine essence, that is absolutely unknowable and incommunicable. If we were to somehow unite with God's essence, Lossky argues, we'd simply dissolve into the divine nature and poof, we'd cease to exist as humans. But the divine energies, that is the uncreated communicable reality of God that actually reaches us. This specific distinction is what makes true union with God possible without totally destroying human personhood.
Section 5. The ultimate goal, theosis. Which brings us to the experiential climax of our explainer. We're shifting from abstract mechanics to actual radical human transformation.
Because everything we've talked about up to this point, apophatic theology, the Trinity, the essence and energies, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They all function as an organic whole directed toward one singular practical goal, theosis. Theosis is the deification of humanity. In the Eastern tradition, the goal of the Christian life isn't merely moral improvement. We're just trying to imitate Christ. It is practically oriented toward acquiring the Holy Spirit and being genuinely united with God.
Lossky anchors this heavy, dense theology in a really striking historical account. He points to the 19th century Saint Seraphim of Sarov. There's this famous conversation he had with a follower named Motovilov, right out in the middle of a snowy forest. According to the account, Seraphim was transfigured, and his face shone with a blinding, uncreated divine light. For Lossky, this isn't just a quaint supernatural story or some super rare exception. No, this is the physical experience of those uncreated energies we were just talking about. It's the normal, intended destination of the Christian way of union.
Building on this, Lossky makes a highly controversial, really polemical claim. He argues that the theological divergences between East and West have actually produced genuinely different forms of spirituality and sanctity. He contrasts Eastern sanctity, which he characterizes as being marked by that joyous, uncreated divine light, with Western sanctity, which he views as being heavily marked by suffering, the dark night of the soul, and physical phenomena like the stigmata.
Section 6. Evaluation and lasting legacy. Now, as we step back from Lossky's intense, deeply committed perspective, we really need to offer an objective, multi-denominational critique of his work to understand its real legacy.
Let's zoom out and see how this all builds a complete picture. Now, reviewers pretty much universally praise this book as the absolute clearest English account of the Palamite synthesis. Its brilliant integration of apophatic Trinitarian doctrine is, frankly, unmatched. But it definitely has some real blind spots. The polemic against the West is often seen as pretty uneven, and sometimes downright unfair. I mean, he completely ignores major Western mystics like John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila, whose writings might actually share some deep, surprising resonances with Eastern hesychasm. Furthermore, critics are quick to point out that he kind of just skips over 7 centuries of intermediate Byzantine theology to make his historical points fit a bit more neatly. Because Lossky wrote so directly against Western theology, looking at how different traditions received this book is fascinating. For Catholic readers, the friction over the Filioque is very real, though it's worth noting that post-Vatican II developments actually offer a lot more common ground today than Lossky knew about in 1944. Reformed readers experience strong friction regarding Palamism. That essence-energies distinction can seem like it introduces parts to God, which violates traditional Reformed views on divine simplicity. Yet, surprisingly enough, Wesleyan and Arminian readers find profound, striking parallels with Lossky's emphasis on synergy, that deep, cooperative dance between divine grace and human free will.
Ultimately, the mystical theology of the Eastern Church is a completely indispensable text. It practically opened up the vast resources of Orthodox theology to the entire Western world. But, as our explainer highlights today, it is definitely not a neutral exposition. It is a rigorous, deeply committed defense written for a very specific, tense historical moment, and it demands active, critical engagement from anyone who reads it.
So, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder today. When you look at the teachings and dogmas you've encountered in your own life, do you view them merely as a static list of rules and facts you just have to memorize? Or, like Lossky passionately argues, are they actually an open invitation to a profound, real mystical union? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep asking those big questions.